Hi guys, today I'm going to show you how you can make this corset at home. This is my Daphne Corset pattern. It is available at the link in my bio. It's available in sizes extra small through 3XL. This is definitely a more advanced corset. It does have a lot of channel lines, but we'll take it step by step. This has a scoop neck and that lace up back. Please let me know if you guys have any questions and let's get started sewing. So the first thing you're going to do once you've assembled your paper pattern is cut out all of your pieces. You're going to have a lining and your main fabric. This is my main fabric here. And I'm going to interface all of my main fabric pieces. This is going to give our corset structure and make it a little bit more stiff. I'm using a medium to lightweight interfacing and ironing that on to the wrong side of all of my main fabric pieces. Once that's done, we are going to do things a little differently. So I'm going to take my lining center front and my main fabric center front. You can see I have those here. I'm going to place those wrong sides facing, which we hardly ever say in sewing, but we're going to place those wrong sides facing. Now I'm going to pin these together along the top and along both sides. I am pinning the bottom there. That's just to hold things in place. We are not going to sew the bottom. We are going to sew both sides and along the top just with a basting stitch. This is just to keep everything in place. And again, we're not sewing the bottom, we are only sewing both sides and that top. Once I've got my base stitching done, it is going to look like this. And now we're going to mark up our pattern. So this is what you're going to want your tracing wheel for. You'll see my pattern looks much different because this is the pattern I was using that has all of my notes and measurements on it. Yours is much cleaner. But what we're going to do is we are going to trace all of those lines. Those are our channels that we're going to sew into our corset, and I'm going to trace that with my pattern tracing wheel for all of the lines down the center and the sides of the corset and the ones along the bust. Once I have those lines marked with my pattern wheel, I'm going in with a heat pen. I personally love a heat pen because this disappears when I go in and iron it, so I won't have any markings on my corset, but you can also use chalk. But I'm just going to go over all those lines so they're really, really easy to see because this is what we're going to sew onto. And I'm just using a ruler and placing all of my lines, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the bust. So here you can see I have all of my lines marked. I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew down all of those newly marked lines. And this is going to create the channels for our corset. And we're doing this for the bust and for all those vertical lines. This is definitely one of those patterns that is very sewing intensive. We have a lot of lines to sew, so just make sure you're being patient and sewing all of those lines as straight as you can. Once all of those are sewn, we are going to grab our side front pieces and we're going to take our lining and our main fabric and we're going to place those wrong sides facing. We're going to do exactly what we did with the center front, and I'm going to base stitch the sides and the top. We're essentially just going to repeat the exact same steps for our side fronts and our side backs that we did for the center front. So you can see here I'm grabbing my tracing wheel, I am marking those lines, and then I'm going to go grab my heat pen and I'm going to do the same that we did for the center front and make sure those lines are super visible. And I'm going to do this for both side front pieces. Once those are all marked, I'm going to take that over to my sewing machine and sew down those channels exactly like we did with the center front. Now again, we're going to repeat those exact same steps for our side back. So you can see I'm taking my main fabric and my lining, placing them wrong sides facing, and then I'm going to pin and we're going to base stitch down the sides and the top. Going over it with my tracing wheel, and then I'm going to mark all of those lines for both my side back pieces, and then I'll take this over to my sewing machine and sew down all of those channels. Now I'm not sure why I didn't film this, but you're going to mark both your center back main fabric pieces. I know it's impossible to see my line. There's only one line, but make sure you mark that, and you're not going to sew it just yet. What we're going to do is we're going to take our main fabric and our lining piece and we're going to place those right sides facing. Right sides this time. We have been doing wrong sides. We are doing our center back pieces right sides facing, and we are going to pin along what is essentially going to be our center back where our grommets are going to be up against. That is the straight line, and we are going to sew just along that straight line. Don't worry about the top or the sides on this one. You can see I've sewn that here, and now I'm just going to trim off the seam allowance. Once I've trimmed my seam allowance, I'm going to flip these right sides out, and I'm going to give this a nice, once I've pressed both of my center back pieces and I have them nice and flat and sharp, now we are going to go back over and sew that channel line. Remember, there's only one line that we're going to sew. That's going to be our channel for our boning that our grommets are going to go up against. Make sure you sew this line for both of your center back pieces. Now we're gonna get started with our modesty panel. You can see I have mine right here. If you don't know what a modesty panel is, it is that back panel that's gonna close up so you don't see skin at your corset. So you can see there's with a modesty panel or without a modesty panel. This is optional for however you want your corset to look. If you're choosing to use a modesty panel, what we're gonna do is we are going to place these right sides facing, and we are going to sew up the top, the bottom, and one side. It doesn't matter what side because it is equal on both sides, but pick a side and we are just going to leave that one side unsewn. So once I have this all marked, I'm going to take that over to my sewing machine, sew it up, and once I do, I'm going to trim off that seam allowance. Now I'm going to flip this right sides out and give this a nice press. Once I've got this pressed, I'm going to set aside my modesty panel and we're going to start assembling our corset, and we'll grab this later on. Now we're going to grab our center front piece, and now this next step is optional. These channels are mostly aesthetic, but they can also have boning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my boning for those chest channels. I like to tape off my edges so I don't have to worry about them poking through. And you're going to take out your base stitch along the side, just one side, and enter in your boning through those channels. This will give it a more pronounced look and make it stick out a little bit more, or you can just leave these channels and make them purely aesthetic. Not every channel has to have a boning piece, but we will go over what channels do have to have a boning piece when we get there. Once you've done your optional boning, if you chose to, we're going to take our center front piece and our two side front piece and place them to their corresponding side. Now I'm going to take my side front and my center front, and I'm going to place these wrong sides facing. So your linings are going to be facing, the wrong sides are going to be facing, and I'm going to pin those into place. I'm going to do this for both of my side fronts and connecting it to my center front, and then I'll take this over to my sewing machine and sew these together. Once both sides are sewn together, I'm going to trim off that seam allowance for both of those seams. We're trimming this and we're doing this wrong sides facing because it is going to be covered with bias tape. I know normally we always do everything right sides facing, but it's really important for this one. We are doing our seams wrong sides facing from here on out. Now we're going to repeat those exact same steps for our side back, connecting them to our side front. We're going to take those and we're going to take them to their corresponding side and place them wrong sides facing. Once we've got both of those done, we're going to sew into place and trim off that seam allowance, just like what we did with the side front and center front. Now we'll repeat your center back pieces and do the exact same way that we did your side front and your side back. But if you're doing the optional modesty panel, you can see I have that right here. You're going to do one side differently, just one side. The other one will be repeated the exact same. What we're going to do is we are going to place that modesty panel starting at 3/4 of an inch down from our center back, and we're going to sandwich it in between our side back and our center back. Again, these are right sides facing, and then once you've done one of those sides, you will do the other center back, just like how we did the side back and the side front. So you can see here I've sewn both my center back pieces, one with the modesty panel and one without, and you can also sew both without the modesty panel. And now I'm just going to trim off the seam allowance for both of those sides. Now that I have everything sewn together, we are going to get our bias tape ready. I'm using a 1/2 inch bias tape. You can either make or buy your bias tape. And you need about 4.5 yards. You're going to need a lot of bias tape for this project. Once you've got your bias tape ready, the first thing we are going to do is we are going to place that in the very center of your exposed seam. So this is the right side of my corset, and we're just going to cover that exposed seam with our bias tape, making sure that seam is in the very center and pinning this all the way down. We're going to do this for every single seam. So our side seams, our side front seams, our side seams, and our side back seams. So we'll have 6 total that we're going to be doing. And when we take this over to our sewing machine, we're going to sew down both sides of the bias tape. So you can see I'm going to go all the way down one side, again making sure that that seam is in the center of my tape so that we're hiding all of those exposed seams. And then once I've gone all the way down, I'm going to take this and do the same thing for the other side, creating an additional channel that we're going to eventually place boning into. Here you can see what that looks like. Again, we're going to repeat this for all 6 sides. And once you have that done, we are going to do a bias tape finish for the top of our corset. So I'm going to flip my corset to the wrong side. So this is the lining side. And I'm going to take my bias tape and I'm going to place it right sides facing and place the edge to the wrong side of my corset. And I'm going to fold in those edges so that we don't have raw edges on the end. And I'm just going to pin this all the way along. Again, we're doing this right sides facing, aligning those edges, and this is the wrong side of my corset, the inside of my corset. Make sure when you get to the end that you are not sewing up the modesty panel in your bias tape. That's why it starts 3/4 of an inch below. So make sure when you're pinning all of this, you're pinning that modesty panel out of the way. You don't want to get that sewn up in it. Once that's all sewn up, I'm going to flip over my corset to the right side, and I'm going to flip over that bias tape and fold it in on itself so that it's concealing all of the raw edges. And I'm going to pin this along the top. Again, this is the right side of my corset. Make sure you pin. I use a ton of pins when I do this because I want to make sure I'm stretching out my bias tape and it looks nice and neat. Also, when you go to sew this, make sure your modesty panel is out of the way. Again, we don't want to accidentally sew down that modesty panel. Once our bias tape is all sewn to the top, it is time to do all of our boning. Now, you do not have to do boning on all of your pieces. There are necessary boning pieces and there are pieces that are just aesthetic. You can bone all of these if you like. It'll be a very stiff corset, but these are the channels that you need. So you need those center back because that's what your grommets are against. I suggest doing the sides just for structure, and then you are going to need these side fronts and then also the center front to make sure the corset keeps its shape. All of your other channels can remain boneless. They are purely there for an aesthetic purpose, or again, you can place them in there, but remember, you will have a very, very stiff corset if you place boning in all of the channels. Make sure when you cut your boning channels, you leave 1/2 inch out at the bottom because you want to leave room for that bias tape finish. And we're going to use a bias tape finish just like what was done for the top for the bottom of our corset. I know I didn't film that. I completely forgot that my camera was not turned on. But once you've done your bias tape finish, again, exactly like we did at the top, you are just going to give it a nice press at the top and the bottom. Now I'm going to get my grommets ready. I'm using a 1/4 inch grommet, but feel free to use whatever size you like. I put 10 total grommets on each side, starting about 1/2 inch down right below the bias tape and then 1 inch apart. So here I am marking my grommets. Again, you can use whatever spacing or size grommets you like. Now I'm placing them with a grommet press. If you don't have a grommet press, you can also buy the kits that you can hammer in your grommets to your corset. Once all my grommets are done, I'm actually using these appliques. If you guys are curious about the appliques, they are from Planet Rhinestone. You can order these online. They have an adhesive back, but I normally just like to sew mine on. And once I have those on, I am just going to lace up my corset. And this is your final step. I hope you love your new corset and that it turned out perfect. Please let me know if you guys have any questions, and make sure you follow along and subscribe for the next pattern release.